to tell the world their stories of courage. Jane and Cassie Ventura have been through abuse and trauma, and we couldn't imagine a great modern love story, which was something that was said during Mark Agnifalo's closing arguments, where he compared Cassie Ventura and Sean Combs' relationship to a great modern love story. And that's where even the jury started laughing at that moment. I was in the courtroom when he said that. So the judge is bringing up multiple instances in which he does not agree with the arguments that Combs' team was made. But again, this is a big blow to the prosecution, Laura, who wanted more than 11 years for Combs.
All right, Chloe, stand by there. I want to go now to Kristen Gibbons-Fedden, a former prosecutor, someone who worked hard to prosecute Bill Cosby. And Kristen, I want to ask you how our viewers should make sense of this sentence. Obviously, it's not what prosecutors had asked for. It's not what the defense team had asked for either. He's going at great length now to talk about the survivors, talk about the victims, and call them brave survivors who came forward. He wants to make it clear he doesn't think that this was a great modern love story. How do you think survivors should make sense of the sentence that this judge has just handed down, Kristen?
I think it's complicated, right? For victims, I think this is very complicated. On the one hand, it is validation, as you kind of pointed out. The court rejected the idea that these were consensual relationships. The court explicitly recognized Cassie, Jane, and any others and said that their trauma was real. And I think that that acknowledgement matters in ways that can't really be overstated. You know, again, someone who has worked in the field alongside survivors. It is not only just about the number. It is not only about the charges. It's about the recognition. And from this period all the way back to when the conviction was, I'm certain that Cassie and many others in the survivor community felt that their trauma was being somewhat silenced or masked because Cassie knew that it was about force and coercion, but the charges and the convictions didn't really line that up. And by allowing the court in its sentencing to acknowledge that this was no consent, this was not romantic, there was absolute force, and even the enhancement on recognizing the coercion and her as a vulnerable victim, and even him as a leader of this organization, allowing that to be stated is just such an acknowledgement that I think is going to be powerful. And I think the other thing that's important here is, yes, it's no victory for the prosecution, right? Because again, they asked for 11 years, they got less than half of that. But again, they got to speak the words of the survivors. This was not a consensual romantic relationship. This was 174 drug-fueled coercive episodes over the course of decades, or a decade at least. And so 4 years may not seem proportionate, but he's not going home today.
Yeah, and the judge going on here, Kristen, to say these horrible acts were made public and Sean Combs will never be able to wash them away and will be forever associated with him. Again, these are the judge's words. The judge talking to Jane and Cassie, the survivors, directly saying you weren't just talking to the jury, you were talking to women who feel powerless. You gave them a voice. You stood up to power. It's not easy. Interesting, the judge taking special care after handing down this 4-year sentence, again, short of what the prosecution had asked for, to take such a great pains to address the people clearly who are listening, not just in that courtroom, but around the world, about whether they should come forward with claims like this. Kristen, I want to ask you, this is the criminal case, which is now over. What happens with the civil claims for women who have brought a number of different claims against Combs for acts that the prosecutors had essentially accused him of here?
Yeah, absolutely. The civil claims are still going to be alive, and they are going to be important. Keep in mind, you know, with the criminal cases, the prosecutor has to prove the conduct beyond a reasonable doubt, right? And the fact that he was acquitted of the elements, the sex trafficking regarding the force, the fraud, the coercion, it doesn't mean that that couldn't potentially be proven by a preponderance of the evidence, which is the lower standard. And that's the standard by which the litigators, the plaintiff's attorneys, or the attorneys representing the other survivors will be able to have to prove. And I think that these convictions and this acknowledgement that there was vulnerability, that there was lack of voluntariness by the court in the sentencing, but then also in his words regarding the sentence that he's imposing, I think these are going to be powerful statements and evidence that is going to be used, notwithstanding the fact that all of the evidence that the prosecutors uncovered, both of which was put on as evidence for the trial, and anything else that was precluded from being evidence at trial will be used by the prosecutors and that, excuse me, by the plaintiff's attorneys in representing these survivors. And that is all going to be evidence to show that by a preponderance of the evidence, Diddy engaged in these acts against those plaintiffs. And again, those survivors' words are going to be really bolstered by this sentence, by Cassie, by Jane, and by any of the other survivors who have come forward as well.
I want to bring Misty back into this conversation because, Misty, you and I were sitting together when the verdict came down, and we talked about whether or not it was actually sort of a cautionary tale about the federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York perhaps overcharging Combs and going for things that were a reach. And I wonder also whether today was a cautionary tale for the defense, putting out that lengthy PR video, trying to paint him in the best light and wash away all of the violence that he's been accused of. And even interestingly, raising this issue of him speaking, giving sort of class and sort of inspirational classes to men who might be interested in sort of his business advice. I wonder if that sort of backfired for them and whether this is a cautionary tale for both sides.
So I think you're right, Laura, and there were certain aspects of the defense presentation that really didn't make too much sense to me, like that video, which went back clips of Combs during times in his career and interfacing with his children. I understand the idea behind it because the whole defense argument relates to a few things. One, that this is a case of somebody who is being targeted. There is a focus on other cases and what those sentences were like in other Mann Act cases, which was by far the best argument for the defense. But in addition to that, there are mitigating factors relating to relationships with family, the fact that his mother is elderly, that he has contributed to the community. But there is a limit to how far that goes, Laura, before it becomes much more hubris than actually motivating the judge to make a decision in their favor. So it was a fine line. The other issue, from a defense perspective, is that in addition to taking accountability, in addition to remorse, you also always have to be aware that there is an appeal that is pending, that is right around the corner. And there needs to be a thought about whether or not something that's said in court could actually impact that appellate process. So to me, some of this was a bit heavy-handed on the defense end. I do think at the end of the day, when you're talking about just about 4 years, which is slightly less than what the lower end of what the probation department recommended, obviously a lot more than what he was looking for, this could have been a lot worse. Quite frankly, you could have been more up towards what the prosecution was looking for at 11. It truly could have gone either way. They're before a judge who's not been on the bench very long. There's not a lot of historical data about the way this judge rules in criminal cases. So all in all, he's in a spot that falls on the higher end of the guidelines for the Mann Act without taking into account all those aggravating factors that were presented before the court. So I think there's lessons to be learned on both sides.
Well, that's what's sort of interesting. He's a few months below, actually, where the probation department had recommended the range was, right? So the probation department says somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 7 years, and he comes down to 4. But yet he took such great pains, and obviously you and I are not in court, he took such great pains, according to at least our producers, to lay out all the violence. And I wonder, what do you think sort of tipped the scales in terms of him not going higher?
Well, I think it's twofold. So first of all, the defense had presented a lot of empirical data of other Mann Act cases in federal court and had shown many, many cases, I believe it's about 60, where there had been a downward departure, meaning less than what the guidelines recommend for cases where there were convictions of the Mann Act only. Remember, these judges, especially in federal court, don't work in a vacuum. They're looking at results of similar cases. That's the purpose for the guidelines. That's the purpose for looking at other sentences that have come down in the federal system. So all of that is being taken into consideration. And then, Laura, in addition to identifying what factors are going to be taken into consideration, which was that analysis we heard at the beginning about the guidelines, where this type of case falls, but what other things can matter, like violence, like drug use. the judge is also taking that remorse and rehabilitation aspect into consideration as well.
Misty, always appreciate your analysis and expertise as we walk through all of this. Chloe Malas, you have covered this case from the very beginning. You've watched this judge on the bench. As we mentioned, he was the one who presided over this trial. I wonder what you make of this sentence today, and just taking a step back, whether you think the Combs team will appeal this. The judge has sort of come down in the middle, if anything, gone more onto the side of where Combs wanted to be. Do you think they sort of take this and say, you know what, he'll continue to do his classes behind bars, but you're not going to appeal this?
You know, Laura, one of his attorneys who's really taken the lead at recent hearings is Alexandra Shapiro. She's a very well-known appellate lawyer, and I believe, based on my reporting, that he will likely try to appeal this because, again, his team really wanted time served. He even had speaking engagements set up for next week with a reentry program to speak to those who had served time, and these were these business classes that he started at Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center. So I believe that he really thought he was going to go free, and I think he will keep fighting for his freedom. And I just wanted to also tell you that it is a very different day, a different mood outside of the courthouse today than it was a few months ago, the day of the verdict. It's much more subdued, Laura.
Chloe Malas outside the courthouse there. Appreciate your coverage throughout this trial. We're going to continue our coverage on NBC News Now, and of course on NBCNews.com, and of course on Nightly News with Tom Yamas tonight. I'm Laura Jarrett. We're going to go to break now, and then Hallie Jackson is up next.
Who say they voted for you because they want and need relief. Do you think that the country is currently in a constitutional crisis? Bottom line, is it safe to fly in the United States right now? If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
Kristen Welker hosts Meet the Press every Sunday on NBC.
And our breaking news continues here on NBC News Now. Good day. I'm Tom Costello in for Hallie. We're coming on the air with fallen rapper Sean Diddy Combs being sentenced to spend a little more than 4 years behind bars after he was found guilty of prostitution-related crimes this past summer. The decision came after an emotional day in court where we heard from Combs, his victims, his children, and Combs himself. As he spoke, our team inside court tells us he turned to his family and apologized to his children, and then, sobbing, told his mother, quote, "You taught me better, you raised me better." Combs also broke down earlier in the day when his children took the stand, when his 18-year-old daughter told the judge that her dad promised he would always be there to, quote, "keep us safe." The defense then showed an 11-minute video produced by Combs' PR team that you're seeing here for the first time on your screen, basically celebrating Combs as an inspiration. Here's a piece of that video.
I want the best person trophy. Because I know in order for me to get into heaven, I'm not going to get in there, well, come on in heaven, you had 20 hit records. That don't mean nothing, and that's what this world is for.
That again was a promotional video released by Combs' PR team. Prosecutors reminded the judge, though, that while Combs is making the case that he has changed and moved on, his victims are still picking up the pieces. Prosecutors have been asking the judge for an 11-year and 3-month sentence. Remember, they had accused Combs of orchestrating a decades-long criminal enterprise to force women to participate on sex events that he called freak-offs. A jury ultimately acquitted him of the most serious charges: racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. But they did find him guilty on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. We've got team coverage on this. Kristen Gibbons-Fedden is our legal analyst. NBC's Rahema Ellis, though, is outside the court. And Rahema, we start with you. No cameras in court, but we've got a team inside watching all of this play out. What was the mood like inside the court as the judge handed down the sentence? And by the way, I guess we're hearing from one of the victims right now as well, right?
I think so. There's a lot of action going on behind me, and I'm not quite sure exactly what it is, but you can imagine that people are wanting to respond and to react to what has happened in this courthouse. The mood in the courthouse, it was tense. There was a lot of anticipation about what would happen here today, starting off at the very beginning when the judge, before they got into the impact statements, the judge said the fact that Diddy Combs had been acquitted of the criminal charges, the most serious criminal charges against him, including racketeering and sex trafficking, did not acquit him of the conduct. And he said that that was going to be considered in the sentencing. And during his allocution, when Combs was saying that he was remorseful, that he felt terrible about himself, he felt disgusted, he broke down crying, as you point out. The judge said, in addition to the fact that you point out he played this video of a loving family, the judge said when he began his announcement of what the sentence was to be, he said, I have no doubt that you love your family and that you would love to be with them. But he says, I cannot discount your history and the freak-offs, all the hotel nights, the sex and the drugs and the rock and roll, and you abuse the power and control over women. And he says that he wants to impose a sentence that will serve as an example for others who are might be abused, and for women who might be abusers, those who might be abusers, and for women who might be abused. And so there was a lot of sobbing, but the judge basically at the end of it, should also be mentioned, that he said he was proud of, and he spoke about the courage that Cassie Ventura and others had by coming forward and talking about what had happened to him, to them, and he hoped that it would be an example and inspiration for others, not only here but around the world, who are victims of abuse. Tom?
Yeah, reading the tea leaves, it suggests that maybe Combs really thought he was going to get out today, because the prosecution had said Combs had lined up speaking engagements for as early as next week. The defense, though, tried to then walk that back, right?
Yeah, they tried to walk it back. The prosecution called it pretty much profound hubris, setting up speaking engagements for as early as Monday coming up. That would be October 6th. But the defense said what they were trying to do is show that he wants to present himself as someone who could be rehabilitated, and that his time spent, the 13-month in prison, served as an enormous example and a learning example from him. It was a teachable moment, and he would like to share what he's learned with others. So he would be going to community centers and, in essence, conducting community service, if you will. He called Diddy Combs a civil rights leader, and saying that he would want to go out and continue with this kind of new example, if you will, of how he could live his life. It should be mentioned that even though this sentence has been handed down today, the court cases for Sean Combs are not over. He faces dozens of civil cases against him that still have to be measured in a courtroom. Tom?
And potentially an appeal as well. Rahema Ellis, thank you very much for your reporting throughout the entire trial. Let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Kristen Gibbons-Fedden. Kristen, was this, I don't know, around the length of time you would expect that he would serve? It's not quite what the prosecution wanted, but it clearly is a lot more than the defense wanted.
Yeah, I thought it would be a little bit higher. I thought the judge was going to rule within the guidelines of what the probation department had suggested, which would have been about 70 months. So I thought it would be a little bit higher. But what I thought was most powerful about the judge's sentence was the commentary that went around, and Rahima touched on it. Just acknowledging the pain of the survivors. Also, the fact that he put in the enhancements, specifically the vulnerable victim, the coercion and the leadership enhancements, to actually increase the sentencing guidelines by which he could sentence the defendant in. But I think that was the most important part, was the acknowledgement of the survivors, their bravery, and most importantly, their pain.
Yeah, that does seem to come through, at least through the comments that we've received and reading the comments outside of the courtroom. So what's next for Combs, right? I mean, as Rahima mentioned, he's facing civil cases, and we suspect that his team will, in fact, appeal this conviction, or at least the sentence.
Absolutely. He will definitely appeal not only all of the evidentiary objections and issues that went on during the trial, but of course he will most likely appeal the sentence in and of itself. But all of the civil cases as well, they are going to move full steam ahead. They're going to utilize all of the evidence that was put on during this trial and all of the evidence that was precluded or not utilized during the trial. So those civil cases will most likely be eating up a lot of his time, as well as the appellate issues.
Kristen Gibbons-Fedden, thank you very much for the analysis. We're going to keep an eye on this story throughout the afternoon, but to again reiterate, Sean Diddy Combs sentenced to 4 years and 2 months in prison for several allegations against him that he was found guilty of. And now to our other top story at this hour. Big breaking news out of the Middle East in the last hour. Hamas announcing it is releasing, or will release, all of the remaining Israeli hostages, living and dead, as part of President